Poinsettia, Chapter 14. "Will not be the whole story," Angus concluded, sitting up now, still in his wolfen form. "So Lord McIntyre is a friendly vampire," Danny whispered. "I would love to meet him. Perhaps one day. He is rather reclusive. Does he act mean because he's afraid someone will hurt him or leave him again?" Angus glanced at her. It was amazing how sharp this young lass was. Indeed, he too felt this way about Gavin's mood. He chuckled and stroked her hair. "Perhaps that be it, Danny. When you live as long as we do, it becomes more a challenge to keep content, and to find things that be bringing you hope." Danny leaned over, wrapping her little arms around him and snuggling her face into his fur. He erected his ears a moment, trying to process her affection. He rested them with a smile, running his wolfen hands over her. How she intrigued him. She reminded him of himself, of a more excitable Gavin, of the kind-hearted Clementine, and of his beloved wee Caradwyn. The members of the Board of Trustees gathered in their meeting room, checking their pocket watches before taking their respective seats. Mr. McLaughlin was at the head, and Lord McCarran was at the foot of the table. "Are we ready to begin?" Mr. McLaughlin asked, twitching his mustache. "Let's get on with it," Lord McCarran insisted. "We're all here." Mr. McLaughlin took one last look at his pocket watch before giving a nod. He picked up the gavel, ready to bring it down. "Then, as acting head of the Board of Trustees, I call this meeting to—" "Wait!" came a stern voice. The double doors flew open, startling the men. "Lord McIntyre!" Mr. Borders gasped. "You're here!" "You're very observant, Mr. Borders," he snarled, walking nobly to his place. "I wish everyone was as observant about the issues that have arisen in my absence." "What do you mean?" Gavin sat down, grabbing the gavel from Mr. McLaughlin, and slammed it. "This meeting is now coming to order under the command of the President of the Board of Trustees. What has been going on here?" "You'll have to be more specific, your lordship," Mr. Borders said. "Rumor has it that the hospital is losing substantial amounts of money. This is the first time since the hospital's erection that such a thing has occurred. I would like some sort of explanation." "Times have changed since the hospital's erection," Mr. McLaughlin stated. "There has been inflation since then, and faculty has shifted. The hospital is taking in more children as patients and orphan residents. Therefore, it means they need more to care for them. Not to mention that new medicines are very expensive. After all, it is in their best interest to purchase new medicines to give the patients more hope than simply satiating them on older, less effective medications." Gavin narrowed his eyes and glared at Lord McCarran. "You there. Lord McCarran, you're the treasurer. You are responsible for the money being placed into this place. Where is it? Where is our money? Where is the hospital's money? The orphanage's money? Where is my money?" Lord McCann cleared his throat. "Lord McIntyre, I can promise you that every penny is accounted for, and I have the proper receipts. The hospital is just spending more money than it used to, and it is draining out the budget that was set aside for them. Our pockets are only so deep, and we are only so generous. Irresponsible spending is something we cannot reward by digging deeper into our pockets. You know I'm right, sir." Gavin grit his teeth, taking every ounce of his tolerance to not bare his fangs. "What good are we if we cannot help them? We appreciate the idea of generosity. Heaven knows we are made to look awfully good in the public's eye. A bunch of wealthy philanthropists showing their compassion by sharing their wealth with the poor and unfortunate youth is a common tactic to gain respect. But there has to be a line drawn somewhere. We won't be wealthy men if every red cent we make is given to the people who squander that money. You know I'm right." "Your cockiness is not appealing to me," Gavin replied. "Unfortunately, I cannot deny that there must be boundaries. You will have 2 weeks to gather and organize the accounts and bring the receipts, Lord McCarran. I wish to see for myself where the hospital's money is going and why. However, I must scold your idiotic notion of cutting back their money." "What do you mean?" "Don't play cute with me," Gavin roared, standing up and slamming his hand down on the table, making many board members sit as far back as they could in their seats. "I have been told that the budget allowed to the hospital has been cut back to insanely low amounts. If indeed everything is more expensive, the worst thing to do is remove the money the hospital is able to spend. You are not punishing the staff, Lord McCarran. You are punishing those innocent children, and I will not stand for it. Any member of the board who is wishing to save their wallets and turn their backs on those children are welcome to do so, and must resign through the proper channels. Those of us with higher devotions can make up for that loss." His cold green eyes fell on the young lord again. "Another matter is the Poinsettia Fund." "Now, Lord McIntyre, we had a formal meeting about this," Lord McCarran argued. "We all agreed the money in the fund would be more use to the hospital if it paid for necessities and went towards their debt. Do you put such frivolities over their needs? You must set your priorities and decide just how important they are to you." "What was the vote?" Gavin inquired. He glared at Mr. Borders, who trembled in his seat. "Mr. Borders, what was the vote on that?" Mr. Borders stammered and fidgeted, going through the notes and papers. Well... "Mr. Borders, are you incapable as well?" No, your lordship," Mr. Borders stammered. He picked up the minutes from that meeting and scanned over it. The vote was majority for the money from the Poinsettia Fund to be used towards more productive matters. The vote was 6 for the motion and 4 opposed. "You see," Mr. McLaughlin pointed out, "you were in India when we made the decision. But even if you were present, your vote would not have made much difference. My vote is the absolute vote. Had I been present, I would have reminded all of you that that money is non-negotiable. It is for what it is for. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it." He stood tall. "That money was my money that I had set aside for that specific purpose. You have all stolen from me. I will not tolerate this, and nor will any sane courtroom." The board members began to grow pale and fumble about their items. Lord McCarran scowled. How dare this absent Fruit Loop show up out of nowhere and pretend he was all high and mighty? But he said nothing. If everyone else feared this man, there may have been a reason. "I am a very patient man, however," Gavin continued. "You will all reimburse that money into the fund, and you will all be so kind as to reimburse me for the extra money I had to put out to remedy your senseless foul-up. That is, if you all want to keep your hides out of jail and keep a good public image, consider it your generous pleasure and your punishment." He stood tall, taking a deep breath to calm himself. "As for the debt of the hospital, I will set forth a small personal grant, a donation of sorts, as an early Christmas present. If any of you have any adoration for the lives of children, you would all be at least a fraction of that generous as well. But if you wealthy men are so hard for money that you cannot spare what is certainly spare change to you, I suppose I can understand. But I want to see the accounts. I am retaking my command of this board, and this meeting is adjourned." Gavin stepped away from his seat, pushing it in and glancing at his vice president. "Mr. McLaughlin, you have been with this board a good many years, and have been rather successful. I would hate to think you would be slipping. You once held the best interests high on the scales, and now you seem to care for nothing but the bottom line. In a business, this may be grand, but this is something else. I also believe Lord McCarran was appointed by you during my absence 3 years ago as well. If I were you, I would take more charge over your responsibilities. This could follow you on your record. You haven't long before you retire. I wouldn't mess it up now with shoddy decisions. This man is your responsibility. He then glanced at Lord McCarran. And if I were you, sir, I would remember my position in this place. We are powerful men in this community. I would not make a habit of talking like a big dog when you are still but a pup in this room. Gavin made sure he was the proudest of the bunch, puffing out his chest, shoulders back, and head held high. He was the tallest man there, so it was rather easy. He remained silent, feeling it intimidated the men more than his voice could. So far, it proved to be true. Proudly, he took confident strides from the room, glancing at Angus after exiting as the young man crouched nearby. "That there was amazing, your lordship," he said quietly. "You hadn't lost a touch." "This is where you'll be taking over, Angus. I can sense their rage. No doubt they will complain, and I want to be ready for anything. Be my eyes, be my ears, and of course, be very careful." He then perked, as did Angus, and they peered down the hall. Around the corner, Danny was hiding, watching, and listening. "What is she doing over here?" Angus whispered. "Do you know her?" "She is one of the dying patients." Gavin's face softened. "Carry on, Angus," he said, walking past him and calmly down the hall. He stopped short of the corner, sensing Danny, despite the fact that she had tried to hide from him. "Child, come away from there." She gasped, peering out slowly. My, he was tall and beautiful, and a very intimidating man, wasn't he? So this was the Strathaven vampire. "Please don't hurt me." "Don't be silly," he replied, taking a moment before he crouched down to be more at her level. "I won't hurt you. But will you tell me what you were doing over here?" "I have trouble staying asleep at night." She came closer, allowing him to reach out and touch her arm gently. "Do you?" "Yes," he replied. "I suppose I do." "Are you—" She leaned in to whisper, "a good vampire?" His eyes grew wide, his pupils growing small. "Why do you ask?" "I won't tell," she whispered. "Are you one of those men? They yell and argue a lot. It wakes me up sometimes." "I see," Gavin replied. "Dear heart, I am a member of the board. The president, actually. But it seems I am also unlike them." He peered over at Angus, who was listening intently through the door, to the men inside the boardroom. Gavin stood, offering a delicate hand to the child. "This is no place for a child at this time of night. Come, I will take you to the pantry for some warm milk." She hesitated a moment, taking him in before accepting his hand and walking off with him. This left Angus to do his job without any distractions. So far, it seemed that it was just incoherent babble inside. He narrowed his eyes, hearing footsteps coming closer to the door. He gasped and frantically looked around, leaping for a shelf above the doors, which housed a curtain rod, allowing heavy drapes to frame the doors, making it more regal and important in its appearance. One of the doors opened, and a head popped out. That scent. Angus could identify it as the smell of Lord McCarran. Up and down the hall the man looked before darting back inside and closing the door behind him. But this barrier was no match for a werewolf's ears. Down Angus crawled, waiting to hear what came about inside. "He's gone! What in the world was that?" Angus chuckled quietly outside. "Go on and take your faith in your false sense of security. I can still hear you loud and clear." Inside, Lord McCarran returned to his seat. "That man has some gall. How dare he look down on us as irresponsible? Mr. McLaughlin, why did you not defend yourself?" "And how, Lord McCarran, did you propose I do such a thing?" Mr. McLaughlin asked. "Irresponsible? You dared not remark to him that you are more responsible than he? Lord McIntyre employs many absences and freelance frivolities at his leisure, leaving you to do twice the work. He surely neglects the duties as president and is unfit to order us about." "Lord McIntyre has always been a bit on the pushy and stubborn side," Mr. McLaughlin replied. That is no excuse. He has no idea what has been going on. Even if he is not out of the country, he still fails to appear to these meetings. His displeasure is his own fault. Yet he dares to come in and scold us all like infants when he does not get his way. He's a blind fool. It's inexcusable. He knows nothing. What qualifies him to be the president of this board? His family duty? How about the fact that he makes more money than all of us put together? Mr. Borders chimed in. He has always wanted what was best for the hospital. This was McIntyre Castle at one time. Anyone who came into McIntyre Castle was treated with hospitality, or so the legends go. He is a very passionate man. He is blinded by his own compassion and family traditions, Lord McCarran spat. I move that we vote him out of the presidential seat. We should appoint Mr. McLaughlin for the time he has left to be the new president. He's much more attentive than that absent fool. He will not stand for that, Mr. Borders warned. He has more at stake in this than anyone. He is the very foundation of this place. Times change, and so does the baton of power. If we cannot stay afloat as a hospital and orphanage without him, then this place was not meant to stand as such. We can create much more profitable revenues from McIntyre Castle or St. Raphael's. We can create something that will benefit our pockets rather than drain them. The first step is to remove Lord McIntyre from power, Mr. McLaughlin stated. He is expecting a bi-weekly gathering. But let us schedule a secret meeting for the next week and vote him out before he can dance any more to his own tunes. Make note of this, Mr. Borders. Mr. Borders frowned, taking down the notes as commanded. He didn't like this deceit at all. He was also certain that, should Lord McIntyre learn of this, heads would roll at the hands of his rage. Mr. Borders was one of the few members that had absolute faith in the president. Gavin's command, until only recently, had always meant that St. Raphael would flourish. Angus scowled. Sheer mutiny. Was it even possible for the board to remove Gavin from his seat? He then chuckled, realizing how silly it was to worry. Gavin would be very displeased, but perhaps a part of him would be amused at such idiocy. Gavin's name was on all of the accounts, and he was the master over them. Voting him out meant nothing if he closed those accounts or removed the board from them. Such foolish men.